Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Secret Men's Business Podcast. And I'm sad, but I'm also sort of excited to see that this is our last episode of the series, like almost 200 episodes. And I really do think the universe is sort of calling, because our guest today is someone I've been trying to get on the show for a very long time. And ironically, he's the last person on the show today. And he's going to be talking about archetypes and talking about just how we can evolve within ourselves. So on today's show, we're going to be speaking to TAYLOR ROARK from the UK, and he's going to be taking us through some of the warrior, archetypal things that men can connect with. So TAYLOR, how are you, my friend? Or brother, I should say brother, shouldn't I?
Brother, friend, yeah.
So look at that beautiful place you're in. You're in a reading room, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in a reading room in a library around the corner from my home. It's testament to our ability to create, because we had this podcast scheduled, and I woke up this morning. I'm in the UK. It's your evening, my morning. I woke up this morning to drilling and hammering sounds above me that were rather loud, and I thought this is not going to work very well for a podcast. So I had to make last-minute arrangements. This reading room, as you can see, is a beautiful, large space, and the space here is available for speaking and phone calls. So yeah,
very generous of you. Looking at that, the first thing that pops into my head is that I forget what it was, because I haven't been to a library in a long time, and I used to love libraries. And looking at the background, it's like, it brings back that memories of that smell. I love the smell of old books. Before we start, do you want to maybe tell our audience a little bit about your background?
Wow. Okay, a little bit.
Just a little bit about what you do. And
so now I work as a coach, as an intuitive coach. I facilitate people in connecting to their intuition and creating what's most meaningful to them. So individuals, organizations, I work synergistically with organizations, but that's it's taken a bit of a winding road to get here. I started life as a sort of small suburban kid, growing up in various towns up and down the east coast of the U.S.
I was going to say, you got an accent. It's not English, is it?
No. I moved here about 15 odd years ago. I grew up in the U.S. My mom and I moved around. Grew up as a single child of a single mother, took a while to really find myself. I was definitely a searcher. I think the thing that always, the consistent thing I can see is, I remember as maybe even pre-teen, but definitely in my teenage years, being on this search for what I thought was, sort of capital T truth, whatever that was, right? So there were various things that interested me, and then I got sidetracked by a few things. Like I was interested in physics, astrophysics, and sort of cosmology, the sort of Carl Sagan understanding of the world. When I was a teenager, I was like, oh, this'll help me understand how the universe works. And actually, I think it was my first sort of focus of study when I went to university. But I was in a class studying geology of the solar system and rocks, and I just thought, I don't really care about this very much. So I studied English literature and film, and much more in the humanities side. Bumbled through a few things, worked as a blacksmith, metal sculptor, apprentice metal sculptor, and was sort of, testing my artistic abilities at the time, didn't really have very much confidence in those, and fell back on my intellect, which I kind of knew was strong, but kind of it felt limited. Anyway, after a few years out of university, I went to law school, which is a separate school in the US, 3-year graduate school. And I mean, I don't quite know how, but I sort of happened into one of the top law firms working in Wall Street in New York City.
Wow.
And I'm certainly worked hard, but I don't really know how it happened. And so I worked for a corporate Wall Street law firm for about 5 years as an associate attorney. Worked in New York, Tokyo, and London, which is what originally got me here. Bumbled around a bit, got married to a French woman, moved to the south of France, got divorced quite quickly, moved back to London, got involved in renewable energy, was developing offshore wind farms for years and years, consulting, and then really was looking about 5 or 6 years ago of what I really wanted to do. Like I realized that I was in this track of office and corporate and doing fine, but not really very happy in myself. And
Did something like happen, or was it just your feeling inside?
Well, I think a couple of things happened, like over. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of incidents that I think really affected me. So, being a corporate lawyer was great, and I really enjoyed the intellectual challenge of it. But I kind of knew early on that it's not really what I wanted to do. It was such an accolade. I worked very hard in law school, worked very hard to get an interview, and then all of a sudden was given this opportunity to work at this very, very prestigious law firm in New York City. And I just jumped at it. I thought, wow, this is acknowledgement. This is whatever, some kudos from
like
society.
All the work that you've done. It's nice to get that. It's a prestigious job. I mean, so you only worked there for 5 years, did you?
Yeah, and I think really, I mean, it's interesting to think about as well, because I think it ties in here. I mean, I did not grow up with a father. My parents got divorced when I was very young, about 2 years. I had a relationship with my father, but it wasn't great. I mean, he was a father, not a dad. I would go visit him, school vacations and things like that, and we didn't have a very close relationship. In fact, there was a time when I was, I don't know, 11 or 12, when I'd spent a week with him, and I'd spent a week in his home. I'm not sure I really spent a week with him, because often what we would do is he would take me to the office with him, and I would just work with his secretary. So I learned how to file, I learned how to type, but I didn't really get a good connection with my father. And he was driving me back to the airport, and I said to him, "I'm not sure I really want to come back here."
Wow.
What is this? I'm really surprised. At sort of 11 or 12, I said that, but it was true. And I think into my teen years, we started to develop a different relationship. I think for him, I don't think he really knew how to connect with children, and it was awkward. And so when I started to, go into teen years and have more intellectual interests, we could have conversations, and that connected us. He went through a real fall from grace, which I'm happy to discuss, which was very influential in my life, and reconnected us quite strongly. And so from about 17 or 18 on for about a decade or so, we were quite close. He died when I was 29, when I was in law school, and helped me through a lot of the law school process. So I kind of took that connection that it's like the thing I'd wanted as a young boy. I kind of started to get that, and I think he was a lawyer, although he did different law. He was a prosecutor, and then he worked in politics, and I did a number of different things. But we had that connection, and when I was in my third year as a lawyer, we were having our year-end review, and I had two partners in Tokyo give me my year-end review, and it was such a fundamental moment for me, because usually, like particularly big prestigious law firms, it takes 7 or 8 years before you're even considered for partner now.
Wow.
And that's the kind of pinnacle. Your partner, you
Yeah.
own part of the business. It's you kind of made it, um, maybe looking back, maybe they say this to other people, but at the end of my 3rd year, they gave me a review. They said, well, you're doing this well. You could improve on this. You need to think about this. But the 2 guys said, but you're well on your way to becoming partner.
Wow.
And to hear that after 3 years, I mean, there was a part of me that was like, wow, amazing. And then there was another part of me that thought, oh, great, now I know I don't need it.
Yeah.
Sort of like being given the candy early and like before dinner. It's like, oh, here's your dessert. Now you don't have to work for dinner. And it was like, oh.
So can I ask you, what do you think, what was, because you're doing what you're doing now, why do you think you had to go through that journey? Like, what's the main takeaway from being a lawyer for you now being a coach?
So I think there are a few things. One is the ability to be very objective. So I really do see that it is, like we talk about, we don't walk in a straight line in our lives, right? It's more like a sailboat, right? You kind of tack back and forth. And when you look, it's like, we were going in this direction. It just, we were kind of taking a zigzag to get there. So I think, there is an aspect of law that is in search of truth. Now, in the Wall Street world, it's a lot of sort of ones and zeros and as many zeros as you can put on the end, because I was working with a lot of bankers and companies. But there is still a sense of like, well, we're going to capture in a meeting, in a courtroom, in a contract, what it is that's true, right? And I think also it really gave me an ability to separate myself, my interest, my emotion about something from what was going on in front of me. So you get there's an ability to kind of look at things just as they are,
Right?
And that's very much served me as a coach, because people come to me and they provide their very real stories, right, that are affecting them.
And you
for
can
me,
sort
it's
of
like,
see
okay,
it. You can see it subjectively rather than the perception or the story.
Well, objectively, I just really see this is what's going on, so I think that, and also, I mean, there are many things, I mean, like ability to juggle a lot of different things. I'd be working on 5-10 different cases at a time, so I can have, many, 10, 20 clients, and remember, okay, this person said this person said this, or, have my notes and all that sort of organization. So I think it gave me that and an understanding of how organizations work, how economy works, how corporations work. So I do quite well, supporting businesses and organizations.
I find it really interesting. I always find it interesting seeing how people, I used to work in corporate as well. And then, I mean, for me, I had like a mental situation, like I'm going to call it a breakdown from a relationship ending that transitioned me into like to become a therapist. So I really do enjoy hearing that sort of transition, because the listeners can hopefully find hope in the fact that if they feel stuck, when they hear different people talking about their transitions and all that they can feel that hope. So I know that you focus a lot on the archetypes. So I guess what if someone doesn't know what an archetype is? Can you explain it and maybe discuss the ones that you sort of work on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm no scholar, but and I think archetype. In fact, I had somebody on my podcast, a Greek woman who does a lot of work with feminine archetypes, and she came on and really helped me understand this from a different perspective. But archetype is a Greek, it's from Greek, so arche is sort of primary, first, fundamental, foundational, like archaeology, right? It's like that study of the things that were the first things, right? And a type, it's like a type, a foundation, a pattern, things like this. So it's like a first type, or the primary.
So the primary part of a person, and then what we do is we put masks or other behaviors or archetypes on top of that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So it's like, and I think there may have been some some discussion about this for a while, but Carl Jung was the person who really brought archetypes into common usage, and really found that there are archetypes, that there are, or that I actually like to think that archetype is simply it's a concept. It's like a premise.
And are they normally a positive? Are they normally positive at the beginning, or could there be? Could someone have an archetype as the foundation, which is a negative?
Well, I think it probably depends on the archetype, and also I think archetypes, like many things, have both positive and negative, or I would say maybe functional and dysfunctional. I don't really like positive, negative, or good, bad, because we have values into those. But I do think there's an aspect of like functional, dysfunctional that shows up. And like, I have a very Taoist perspective of life, so we have everything within us, right? We are all things, right? So where we put our energy, where we put our focus, what we determines the experience we get out of something. So an archetype is it's like a blueprint. It's a map, it's a blueprint for a possibility. Right. So
I was going to say, do you mind if can you share yours? Like, what's your archetype, you think, or what is the one that is your primary?
So I don't necessarily operate that like that we have a primary archetype. I think that we have there are probably thousands or maybe even millions of archetypes, right? And right. Which one we connect with, we may have an interest in some of these more exploratory archetypes. So one of the primary archetypes that became popularized last century by Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung was the hero archetype, right? Yeah. So if you look across every society that has ever existed has a hero myth, and the hero myth from Papua New Guinea to Inca Peru to Asazi Indian or Romanian, everywhere has pretty much the exact same arc of what happens with the hero. The biblical stories, myths from Sumer regions, from India, all have a hero myth, right? Where a hero is, the basic premise of a hero is that he or she is born of royalty, but doesn't know it, has to go into hiding. There's a threat to that child's life, right? So, Moses famously, right? There was an edict to kill all children, right? So he had to be put in a basket and put down the Nile and raised in Egypt, away from the threat. Superman is a modern hero myth, right? Harry Potter, right? There's this person is born into sort of conceptual royalty, right? The kind of mythical royalty that we are divine, right? And because old lineages, right? Kings and queens came from the divine, and so that person goes into hiding, right? And they grow up not recognizing that they are a hero. They just think they're a little boy, little girl, and often living sort of a sort of pauper, sort of peasants life, right?
So does that apply to, how everyone, you said it's become, it's quite regular, or quite known, the hero one. And I do notice that there's a lot of courses and a lot of talk about that. So does that mean everyone has that storyline? Like, is that what people are doing in their courses, learning what their hero's journey is?
I believe so. I believe that we all have the opportunity to live out particular myths or archetypes, right? So it's like they're latent potential within us, and the extent to which we give them energy, focus, life, actually then propels us into that. I think one of the real to the point of this, the courses, they're great, right? Because they bring it into people's lives. And I think one of the great failings we have is that we're separated from that. We think that myths are some sort of fiction, and that's but you can see the thing is, like, there are people who say that if we don't, and Carl Jung was brought this in, if we don't bring energy and consciousness into something that is inherent, it will find its way regardless, right? It's like there's a pressure. The pressure will find its release one way or another. So it's either going to find its release in the functional sort of higher aspect, or it's going to find its way through a more subtle, not necessarily really living this. So the prevalence of superheroes now, the Marvel universe, the DC comics, right? I mean, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Right? and so we as as a species, as humanity, what we've displaced our potential for the hero within us onto a screen. Well, that Batman and Thor and these, that let me identify with these characters out there. Now, interesting, and so for adults, right, that's what we do. Now, I think for children, they get it much more, right? Because they go and they put the costumes on, and they're like, I am this character, I am this, and they start to feel that through them, which is how it should be, right? So I think there are these. There are these archetypes that are potentials within us, and then what we do with them determines how well we function. It's like how well they move through us.
Can I ask a question then? So how I mentioned earlier that I was forced into realizing things. So I just want to make sure I understand, because I think that I did have that. Like, so about 6 years ago, I woke up and I couldn't walk. So I went to bed walking, and I woke up disabled, right? And so I had to learn how to adapt my whole life. And I really do feel like that experience, I can walk now, but that experience was, that was where I really changed. And I think listening to you, that's probably where I was, that was my hero's journey, because I had to go through hell and back. So sometimes it's, is that what you mean by sometimes it's forced on us, and other times
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody can have various experiences that, and it's like, well, everybody has this opportunity within them, and I think once you understand an archetype or a myth, then you start to see, okay, what can I follow? Where am I starting to go off, or where am I on track for something? Albert Einstein, arguably the greatest mind of the 20th century, said, how to actually be more intelligent. He said, read fairy tales, and then read more fairy tales, because there's something in this, like, it's not what Joe wrote or Taylor wrote. There's a collective that came up with these that the culture created, right? And so what the hero is for Australia versus UK in modern times versus 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago or whatever it is, determines how that culture sees this potential playing out. Right. And with that map, when you understand that, this lineage of oral tradition, but also like the wisdom that's flowing through an entire population and us as a species, then you start to see, okay, this is how I can actually make this journey not only more interesting, but more fulfilling. And that's the thing. It's like it actually fills us out. So I'd like to maybe
I love that.
Explain, because that ties into how I use archetypes in men's work.
I was actually going to ask you, is there a difference with men? Like, are men now seeing it more now? I sort of feel like there's been a big shift with men actually seeing things. So do you think that they're seeing and connecting with their archetypes more than ever before? Or probably in this generation?
Well, I think it's always there. I think we're always there's the four main archetypes that I use for men's work are the king or the sovereign, the warrior, the lover, and the magician, and I'm happy to speak to all four of those. And I like them because they're because it's quite simple, right? I know there's, we spoke about sort of 12 archetypes, and you can find all sorts of lists, right? I don't pretend that what I use is, it's not like God and they showed up on stone and I walked down from the mountain, right? It's just it's a map.
Yeah. And I like that word simple. If it makes sense, then I think people connect with that, don't they?
I think so, and it helps. There's a way to overlay. Like I'm very connected to nature. I talked about some of my sort of Taoist interest, and so that for archetypes, works very well, because I overlay it with as a starting point with the cardinal directions, right? So we have a compass of north, south, east, west. Right, we understand that, and there's something about the masculine energy that's like, we want orientation, right? We want to know, okay, I'm going this way, right? This directional vector thing, which of course, we have a sexual organ that's very directional, vector focused, right? And so why is that? Because that's what our energy does, right? What are sports about? Getting the thing over, it's like from one point to another. Get the ball in the goal over the line, right? It's this very directional vector. This is winning. This is the achievement, right? So, the Native American Indians spoke about how the world, from a limited sort of human mind perspective, right? We have to put concepts onto things, right? Joseph Campbell's one of his mentors, I can't remember his name right now, said that the truth cannot be described, right? Universal cosmic truth cannot be described, right? Once you start to put words on it, you've put a limitation. You've tried to define it, right? Where is it? The oneness and blah blah blah, and like and whatever. These things, these concepts, God, universe, right? They're bigger than words, right? But we approximate them into words to be able to talk about them. So the Native Americans considered the universe as a starting point, as a circle, right? So, obviously we define it by a circle, but it's the concept that everything exists within this space. But within that, there's chaos, right? Where does the circle begin? What does it mean? It's like there's everything within that. And that is a feminine principle. The universe, the potential for everything is a feminine principle. When I speak about feminine and masculine, I don't mean men and women, right? It's
the
easy
energy
to talk about. And it's easy to talk. I often don't even like the terms feminine and masculine, because nowadays they're sort of loaded with values and a misunderstanding. If we in the West had a connection with like yin and yang, right, we could use those, right? But it's this idea that creation has two forces that come together that are complementary, that must exist in order for life to happen, right? So test tube babies aside, right? But even still, right, you've got to put a sperm and an egg together to create a human being, right? So those are two opposite but completely complementary. Neither one is better, right? They
need to connect.
And that's what I love about the yin and yang symbol, because you've got the sort of black and white paisley, but beautifully within this huge white, you've got this black dot.
Yeah.
And within this huge black place, you got a white dot, because they come from each other. It's like it shows this, this dynamic sense of.
Is there a correlation between that and acceptance? That, because I look at yin and yang as like dark and light, and so you've got to accept the good things and the things that you don't like to be. And I know that you said you don't like good and bad, but that sort of like connection to. That's when I was mentioning my disability, like I was able to walk once I brought those two parts together, because I was really fighting the denial part, and so that could have been my masculine, I guess. And I was struggling to actually connect with my feminine, which is the nurture, more the, and then once that clicked, it was amazing how the body just went into action and just did its own thing. So, are men becoming more connected with both sides, or are they connected with both sides that you're seeing?
Well, I think, in fact, that's probably one of the biggest challenges. There are certainly a lot more men that are connecting with that, but I think we're in a crisis in our world today. So we're familiar with the what's kind of been labeled now toxic masculinity, the kind of rah, and I would say it's people who are, go back to the archetypes, who are very sort of over warrior, right? It's all competition, and you can, I mean, it's not even a boy or a man's fault, right? Because the whole societal structure that we live in, kind of puts this into play. I mean, but the society we live in is just a creation, right? There's nothing sacrosanct about capitalism, or a market economy, or a U.S. dollar, fiat currency, or any of these, right? They're just made up.
Is it the same with the warrior? So the warrior part. If guys are more warrior focused, does that mean that is that sort of encompassing aggression and anger, those sort of emotions?
Well, yes, it does. But every archetype has what I would say is a balanced and a deficient and an excessive side. So all of this, I mean, my understanding, my initial understanding of these four archetypes comes from the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette.
I've got that book and I haven't read it. I'm so naughty.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. There were two American Jungian analysts who created, who synthesized this. I would say, not created. They synthesized this understanding, and that framework. These four archetypes are used in men's circles and men's work, around the world, and certainly in sort of more Western, sort of US, UK, Australia, and a lot of other places. What they say, and how I interpret it, and I think they would say this as well, is we have all the archetypes within us, right? So you have a king or a sovereign, however you want to call it. You have a warrior, you have a magician, and you have a lover.
Right.
And it's just how are you using them? How are you integrating them? And it goes back to that concept of fullness, right? Because I think what, in my experience, what's happening is that we're not aware of what it means to access our magician.
Well, I actually thought I only had one. There's a lot of misinformation out there, because I really, how you do those sort of like you can do like a survey or something and it tells you. So this is really good, because it's the first time I'm actually realizing that you are all four, or you have all four inside of you.
Absolutely. And if you don't, then you're out of balance. You're not in your fullness, because the basis, right? So we're all sovereign of our own worlds, right? Now, whether that's my personal world, whether that's my family, my company, whatever it is, right? So that we have this concept of being, king of our own realm. And in a lot of some people think it's like, oh, the king is in power, and there's they're ruling over everybody else, but and also that there's only one king, right? But many cultures, I mean, going back to Native Americans, right? They had federations of tribes, and it was just like, well, we're over here and you guys are over there. And there's nothing right or wrong. We're not better or worse. I mean, sometimes there was, warring and all that, but basically, that's your place and this is my place, and we come together and have a chat. How are things going with you? How are you dealing with the frost? How are you dealing with the famine? Right? How are your people dealing with this? Right? So two sovereign entities can come together and discuss things. So a sovereign is the kind of overarching concept, but it is but it's both. The overarching concept, I suppose, but also an archetype within. And
so is that like the individual? Are you sort of saying that individually, when you're comparing the tribes in the other example, like is a relation the fact that all of us come together, but we all have our own.
Exactly. Yeah. We're all sovereign over our realm, however you want to define your realm, but it starts with this human body, the intellect, the emotions, our diet, all this stuff. So there is some force, an archetype, that is in charge of that. And what is a good kingdom, right? A good kingdom is not one that's out marauding and killing and doing all this stuff, because it's a waste, right? It's a waste of energy. And people, you take the people and they're not working in the fields, they're not working at their jobs, they're gonna be out killing, and so then everybody has to use all the money and crops to send to the troops that are hundreds of miles away. It's inefficient, right?
Yeah.
A good kingdom is a peaceful kingdom, that and a king, the king energy has two main functions. One is order. So, in a lot of societies, right, the king or the queen, right, it's not exclusive to gender, but the archetype provides order, right, provides justice, right. Zeus famously was the sort of lawgiver in ancient Greece. But I was traveling in sub-Saharan Africa a few years ago, and I met a guy who he was a prince, but he decided to be a driver out in the bush because he'd grown up in the national park in was it Kobe National Park in Botswana, and his father was a local king, and when they were kicked off the land, out of the national park, and had to go live in towns by the national government. But even before that, people would come to this man's father and be like, just disputes. I have a goat. My neighbor stole my goat. Okay, how are we going to resolve this dispute? Okay, come forward. What's the goat look like? Yeah, I had this. I put my brand on him, and that goat. Oh, okay, cool. We've resolved this, right? So and all sorts of things like that, right? So the king provides that sense of order, right? And this is how the kingdom's going to be run, right? When we get up in the morning and we say, well, I'm going to do my meditation. I'm going to have breakfast at this time. I'm going to work out. That's a king. That's a king function who's putting that order in place.
And when you said that there was chaos, or the world is what did you say? The world is like a mess, or there's chaos. Yeah. Is that? Are you sort of saying that we're not connecting to our kings? A lot of people are sort of, because in my therapy practice, I've noticed, like, through COVID, there's been a lot of people that are lost, and it's really quite unusual. So, do you have a reason why that could be?
Yeah. I think there are many reasons, but I think to your point, there is a sense that yes, the world is chaos. The universe is chaos. There is nobody actually cares about Joe or Taylor. The universe doesn't care, right? The universe is just doing its thing. I don't know how it works, right? And so we have to bring order for ourselves. Now we bring order in the collective and all that. But there is a sense that yes, we're not connected to our own personal sovereigns, and so we give our power away.
Right.
Oh, well, the state knows. Oh, the scientists know. The corporations know. My mother knows. My partner knows. My boss knows. I don't know. Right. And so, yes, it is true. I think that many of us have lost that connection to our own, inner sovereign.
You really explained it well. I mean, again, when I was talking about the example, I am talking more about younger people. Like, I've noticed 16 to say 25. There was an increase in suicides. There was an increase in anxiety. So it could be that's the fact that they never really learned how to manage things, because they were probably, I'm going to guess that they could have been spoiled, or they could have been given everything, compared to, say, when we grew up and we had to go and learn things. I don't know. It's very interesting, just comparing different ages and different ways that we learn these archetypes.
Well, I think, yes, and maybe you and I have gone through, I mean, I don't know what it is, but, I guess the reality is these archetypes exist. So some of us stumble across, some of us stumble upon them anyway, right? So you said, in a way, you felt like you went through your own hero's journey. There was nobody guiding you through that, but something, your own energy guided you through that, right? Who knows
I sort of didn't have a choice. I felt like I had to. If I didn't, I think there would have been something bad would have happened. Like, I was sort of pulled towards, I've hit when they talk about rock bottom, this is it, I'm here, there's nowhere else to go, what I do? And so that, I really do believe that was my push. I didn't go down the path of victim of saying, poor me. I just thought, no, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to walk. right? And so something clicked in me because the doctors were saying I wasn't going to walk, and I wanted to walk. So I don't know
Yeah.
if that sort of is what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, I think whether it's having a crisis like that, or whatever it is that we go through, right? We either at some point, I mean, something in you had to say, because if the doctor is saying you're not going to walk, you could have said, well, who am I? I'm not a doctor. I guess the doctors are right. I'm just going to stay here in bed for the rest of my life, right?
Yeah.
But there's another part of you that said, no, but I want to walk. I don't know how. I don't know if it's possible, but I want to.
It's
right?
amazing how that happens.
And we all have this indomitable spirit, and it's just whether how is that nurtured? How is that given energy and spirit? And it's not to say that it always works out, right? I mean, we fail all the time, quote unquote fail, right? Or we don't reach our potential. And, the great entrepreneurs and the great artists and the great sportsmen or sports persons of all time say this: I'm never going to reach my potential, and I'm going to fail, quote unquote. I'm not going to. I'm going to come short all the time.
Is it bad to think that you will, though?
Do it.
Like, does something happen to you when you reach it that you go, I am going to reach it, and something changes in your mind? Because that's what I sort of feel like's happened. Like, the doubt's gone. I don't feel like I've got doubt anymore. Yeah, I just feel like I walk into it and I just do it now, rather than questioning and thinking and being negative and being hard on myself. And
I think we come to our own transformation, right? Transformation has to be experienced, has to be lived. Right? You can't read in a book, and I suppose it's what you're saying, right? There's an attitude, there's a perspective about it, because if you read Stoics like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, there is no fail, like quote unquote failure is just a learning.
Yeah.
And Carl Jung also said that he worked as a psychotherapist for over 50 years, and he said, I never cured anybody, I never fixed anybody. In all my hundreds or thousands of patients I saw, I never cured anybody.
Yeah.
What happened was that the person came to a new understanding through whatever process and therapy and whatever they went through, but that person came to a new understanding of his or her life, such that the problem that they saw at the beginning was no longer a problem. You outgrow the problem. It's just like the circumstances may still be there. Well, I don't like this, but you outgrow, right? And to transform means to literally go beyond. Trans is beyond, to go beyond form. So I'm in a place where things are a problem, and if I transform, circumstances may be the exact same, but I've gone beyond thinking it's a problem, and now it's just an opportunity. Now it's a learning. Now it's just a set of circumstances.
I've just noticed the time. I'm so sorry if I've made you go over, but I just got so. I can
talk for hours.
I could tell. Like, I just got absorbed in what you were saying, because I really do think that you're the most intelligent person I've had on the podcast. Bringing all these really things that you can connect with, and I really do think that this is a really deeper subject that you could talk for longer. But I'm going to let you go, and thank you so much for coming on and explaining it. Can you just, one last question, could you suggest where would you suggest someone starts looking if they're interested in this stuff? Like, what would is there a book that you would suggest, or a website, or?
Well, certainly, Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette's book "King, Warrior, Magician, Lover" is a great book on masculine archetypes. I think James Hillman, "The Soul's Code," is a great book on purpose. Joseph Campbell, "The Hero with 1,000 Faces" is a bit dated in its reading, but a lot of Campbell, particularly some of his anthologies, are very, very good. And welcome to look at my website.
Yeah, well, I'm going to definitely put all your stuff there. But do you think that guys that aren't very averse to this sort of stuff, is it something that they could really understand, or do you think that? I mean, this is a silly question, or do you think it's sort of advanced?
No,
you know what I mean. You know how sometimes people struggle and they go, "I don't get it," or they what are your clients saying to you when you introduce it?
Well, they're very happy to have it.
Right.
I think men are averse, and certainly in my own business, I mean, it's a challenge, right? I mean, there are a million different distractions, right? The biggest currency now is
Mm.
attention, right? I mean, we've got apps and
No.
emails and Facebooks and Instagrams and TikToks, and our attention has gone down dramatically, right? So you got to capture somebody's attention, and sort of, this is why all the clickbait stuff, right? You see a video or something, and the screenshot of it is like, do these 3 things and you'll win $1 million, right? Or you'll get $1 million, and then you click on it and it's like, well, look, this takes a few weeks or it takes a few years, but we've got to get the person into that, right? And so how you keep that going, and that's a challenge of being an entrepreneur, running business, and certainly what I face. But I do think that people are absolutely eager for this type of work, but it is a challenge to get the men, because the thing is, we sort of touched into it. There, to be balanced, to be full, to be fulfilled, to be in one's fullness, you've got to accept the good with the bad, right? To use those terms, but you've got to accept the functional and the dysfunctional. There's a part of me that I don't want others to see, right? Our shadow, Jung would call it. But until you integrate that, until you say, cool, this is just who I am, this is a part of me, but it doesn't define me, then but that takes vulnerability. That does take a sense of, like, you're talking about acceptance, right? There is this, like, ooh, and I'll just say, it goes to, because we didn't really get into the fullness of the different archetypes, but the other aspect of the king, besides order, is blessing. And it's something we don't really, I mean, we're really, really lacking in that, right?
Blessing, like, is that like gratitude, you mean? Or
yeah, but like actually giving a blessing. The king knights somebody, or the king gives the accolade that says, oh, this person has this, and okay, I'm going to, I mean, it can get confused with a lot of, like, I want to take it to the more mythical realm rather than what we see in practical life. But the concept is that there's a king, there's a sovereign that is giving a blessing as the channel of the divine, right? And the opportunity that is sorely lacking is that we give that blessing to ourselves. That's why we have a king. We have to, and of course we're looking for it all out there. But when we give ourselves blessing, when we bless ourselves in all our aspects, our wonderful, unique and strengths and talents and abilities, but also our limitations, bless those things that seem like they're failings or limitations or all that. Bless them. Cool. It's like exactly, because
that's why I think that that's why I think sometimes that the crisis is a really good helper. But the reality is that you're not meant, you shouldn't have to have a crisis. I mean, I would hate anyone to go through what I went through, but it sort of looked, like, I do think that I may not have noticed what you're talking about if it wasn't for the crisis. So it's weird, like, you know what I mean? Like, so, I really wish that people would just realize that they can do it without having to go through shit.
Well, the one of the other great failings of modern society is that we're the first, for the first time in human history, and I don't know how long back this goes, but called 50 to 100 years, we don't have initiation. Boys are not initiated to be men.
Right.
Girls are not initiated to be women, like as a ritual, right? And I don't mean to get like sort of crazy ritual, but just this concept that boys need to be shown by a group of men what it means, to go from this step of, like, you were a boy and now you're a man. I mean, just Campbell does some absolutely beautiful and brilliant things on this, and we don't have that, right? So that's why.
Did we ever have it? I looked at my granddad and I sort of spent a lot of time with these older people, and now I look at my nephews and they don't have any contact with their elders.
Exactly, because old people we just shuttle off, right? Push them out, right? So they don't have wisdom. I mean, there are cultures that do respect that, but certainly in the West, we don't really do that. And and so that's why, we have 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old men and women who are really just boys. For this podcast, it's boys trapped in a man's body because they haven't gone through this concept of what it means to transition. Now, I will say that there are certain things like the army, I guess, that does do that, but it's in a sort of different kind of way. Gangs do that, but I mean, it's obviously quite violent, to go from, but there is, it's like that concept again, it's like the concept is there, so it will find its way.
Yeah. What about work? Like at work, when you sort of go up the ladder and get sort of like from
but that is, I mean, not to be sexist, but that is to me, that's a masculine energy, right? Because it doesn't go to. I think women have it slightly easier. Although I'll talk to many women about this, because a woman goes through a physiological difference where all of a sudden, blood's coming out of her. Somebody has to say, "Oh, this is what's happening to you," and you are now transitioning from a girl to a woman. Now, there are a lot of women who tell me, yeah, but actually there's a lot of shame and guilt and nobody actually really talks to you about this. So I think there is a problem, but I think there is much more women gathering and collect stories because it goes to that circular reference, right? There's a holding, whereas in that vector masculine energy, we're about competition. So boys and men don't sit around and say, "Oh, well, what's your experience? Oh man, I really have a problem with this. Oh yeah, man, I really have that as well." Now, men's circles do that, but you have to be willing to put yourself into that. And you look at the culture now, the commercials and governments and the organizations, and it's just completely absent. So it's boys and men or whatever have to go searching for that. But we're hungry for it. We're hungry for it, and it is out there.
Oh, I wish I had more time. Thank you. I really have to go, but I just wanted to say again, thank you. And you've really left, you've far exceeded my hopes and expectations of meeting you. Like, you're such a wonderful, wealth of knowledge. And now I understand the question I asked about the law thing is like your intelligence, I think, is what's needed, because sometimes this sort of self-help stuff like this stuff can be a little bit like simple, but when you explain it the way you do, I haven't had goosebumps in a long time, so thank you for that. So I've got another podcast which I'm going to invite you on because I think that you need to go on that one too, but I'll talk to you about that later. So thanks so much for taking the time out on a Friday.
Thank you, Joe. Lots of love.
All right, everybody, this is the last one. It's over now. You've been listening to the Secret Men's Business podcast. Everything that you want to hear about Taylor is going to be below. So again, he's a very, very friendly. I've attained to that. He will talk to you. So hit him up if you've got any questions. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. We've got, again, 200 episodes. But don't forget, we now are launching the Harder Shaft podcast, which is all about sexual men's health. So stay on board and keep on listening. Till next time, bye, everybody. And thanks for everything that you've given. Bye.